Rhea Calder had been assigned to the Leonari settlement as a cultural liaison exactly 43 days ago. The council had warned her that the species was proud, territorial, and historically resistant to outside influence. What they hadn't mentioned was that the Leonari cubs were utterly irresistible. The settlement sprawled across the amber plains of Kesher Prime, a network of communal dens carved into the redstone cliffs. The Leonari themselves resembled the great lions of Earth's savanna, but larger, bipedal, with intelligent amber eyes and elaborate manes that signified everything from family lineage to social standing. Their society was built on honor, strength, and tradition, none of which seemed to include tolerance for humans. For 6 weeks, Rhea had been met with cold shoulders and suspicious glares. The adults kept their distance, and the warriors watched her every move as though she might steal their young or poison their water. She'd begun to wonder if the assignment was doomed to failure. Then came the evening she met cub Vero. The little Leonari couldn't have been more than 5 standard years old, with a wild, tawny mane that stuck out in every direction and eyes full of mischief. He'd wandered away from his family's den and found Rhea sitting outside her modest habitat, braiding strands of the local grass into patterns an old habit from her childhood on the farming colonies. Varro had watched her fingers work with fascination, creeping closer until he was sitting right beside her, his small, clawed hand reaching out to touch the intricate braid. "Pretty," he'd said in halting universal common, one of the few words he knew. Rhea smiled. "Would you like me to make one for you?" The cub's eyes widened. He touched his own wild mane, then nodded enthusiastically. What followed was perhaps the most peaceful hour Rhea had experienced since arriving. Varro sat perfectly still, a remarkable feat for any child, as her fingers worked through his thick mane, sectioning and weaving it into a simple 3-strand braid down one side. She wove in a few of the amber grasses for decoration, their golden color complementing his fur. When she finished, Varro had rushed to a polished metal surface to see his reflection. The pure joy on his face had been worth every suspicious glare she'd endured. "Thank you, human Rhea," he'd chirped before scampering back toward his den, one paw constantly reaching up to touch the braid. Rhea had thought nothing more of it, just a small kindness to a lonely child in a place where she had few friends. The next morning changed everything. She emerged from her habitat at dawn to find a sight that made her stop dead in her tracks. A line of Leonari cubs stretched from her door across the settlement square, dozens of them, from tiny ones barely able to walk to adolescents nearly as tall as she was. Each one sat patiently, their wild manes uncombed, their eyes fixed on her with hopeful anticipation. At the front of the line sat Varro, his braid still perfectly intact, beaming with pride. "Human Rhea," he called out. "I showed everyone. Now they all want pretty manes too." Rhea's heart hammered. Behind the line of cubs, she could see adult Leonari emerging from their dens, watching with expressions she couldn't quite read. The settlement's alpha, a massive male named Kesh with a magnificent black mane, stood at the edge of the square with his arms crossed. This could go very wrong, very quickly. But then Varro bounded up to her, taking her hand in his small paws. "Please? You make the best braids in the whole galaxy." How could she refuse? Rhea sat down on the stone step and gestured to the first cub in line, a tiny female with a silvery mane. "Come here, little one." What followed was the strangest, most wonderful day of Rhea's life. One by one, the cubs came forward. She braided manes in dozens of styles, simple plaits, intricate weaves, decorative patterns their parents had worn generations ago but had long forgotten. She wove in flowers, grasses, and colored threads the cubs brought her. Her fingers cramped and her back ached, but she didn't stop. The cubs chattered excitedly, comparing their new braids, showing them off to siblings and friends. Some of the shyer ones whispered thank yous in their native tongue. Others, like Varro, hugged her fiercely before running off to show their parents. As the sun climbed higher, something remarkable happened. The adult Leonari began to draw closer. First, they simply watched. Then, a few mothers sat down near Rhea, observing her technique. One elderly female with a silver-streaked mane made a comment in Leonari that made the others laugh, though not unkindly. By midday, when Rhea's fingers were trembling with fatigue and she'd braided her 40th mane, Alpha Kesh approached. The crowd fell silent. He looked down at her for a long moment, his amber eyes unreadable. Then he lowered himself to sit before her. A gesture of equality that made several Lianari gasp. "My daughter waits in that line," he said in perfect universal common, his voice like rolling thunder. "She has spoken of nothing else since she saw Varro's mane. She says the human has magic in her fingers." Rhea swallowed hard. "No magic, Alpha. Just practice and patience. You have shown kindness to our young." Kesh continued. "You have honored our traditions, the old braiding patterns our grandmothers once wore. You did this, asking nothing in return." He reached up and loosened the leather tie, holding back part of his own magnificent mane. "I am told," he said with the faintest hint of a smile, "that you are skilled with the warrior braids as well." Rhea's hands shook as she reached forward, understanding the honor being offered. The settlement's Alpha was allowing her to touch his mane, a sign of trust among the Lianari that couldn't be overstated. As her fingers worked through the thick, coarse hair, weaving the ceremonial patterns she'd studied in her preparation files, she felt the settlement around her transform. The walls of suspicion crumbled. Conversations started. Cubs laughed freely. By the time the sun set, Rhea Calder had braided 97 manes. Her fingers were raw, her back screaming, and she'd never been happier. Varro was the last cub to leave, sleepy-eyed and content. "Will you braid my mane again tomorrow, human Rhea?" She smiled, ruffling the fur between his ears. "How about next week? Give this one time to shine." As the settlement quieted for the night, Alpha Kesh approached once more. "The council was right to send you. I won police. I teeved a 2000, he said quietly. "You have done what diplomats and warriors could not. You have shown us that humans understand what matters. Family, tradition, and the joy of children." Rhea looked at the peaceful settlement, at the cubs already asleep in their dens with their carefully braided manes, at the adults, who now nodded to her in respect. Sometimes, the greatest bridges between worlds weren't built with words or weapons. Sometimes, they were woven with patient fingers and a kind heart, one braid at a time.